So, just brief introduction for anyone who doesn't know me. My name's Lucinda. My background is corporate learning and development. And I was very actively involved in talent management in both large organisations I was involved in back in the day. But of course, technology and things have moved on. So it is really interesting to see where we are. Ali, I love that. It's been a bit meh. Yeah, it is interesting. Lots of us have aspirations for talent management, don't we? But actually, it's how can we really bring it to life and make it relevant for our organisation? Some of you may know that I also host the HR Uprising podcast. I am running a high performance HR series at the moment, and there's been a couple of topics on talent. So if this is of relevance to you, we'll send you the links to the podcast when we send out our follow-up email, so you can actually take a look and refer to any of that content that could be relevant to you. So that's my little introduction, because I've asked you to introduce yourselves. In terms of where we are, what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about how we might define talent. We'll talk a little also about the different jargon and how it's evolved over time. How can you develop a talent management pathway? And we'll touch on 9-box grids and career pathways, and then just ask the questions about the future of talent or talent management. I'm bringing you this from my role. I suppose the reason we offer these webinars is if you're not aware of Actus, we position ourselves as a complete performance talent and learning management suite, certainly in this space. Anyone in financial services, we're also really active in compliance as well. So what that means is we offer performance management, which is a key part of identifying key talent, but also we have talent management functionality in terms of being able to define talent pools and succession management and learning management. Because of course, when we think about why we want to look after talent, we want to make sure they develop so that they stay with our organisation and that they have the skills that they need to continue to develop. So that's very much the space that we are in here at Actus as well. So how might you define talent? I'm interested. I've got 3 definitions, and I think in actual fact, I'm going to put them up, and rather than get you to do a poll, I'm going to get you to just answer in the chat for me. If you were in an organisation, and I'm not sure how many, I know there's some consultants that are here, so you may not be in an organisation, or you may work with lots of organisations. Which would you choose as talent in your organisation, or would it be a different answer? So rather than me doing a poll where you're only controlled to one answer, why don't you just put in the chat, is the answer A, B, C, a combination, or something different? So in your organisation, which applies? Would you consider talent to be just a very select 5 or 10% of the employees? It's all about performance, it's quite elitist. Is it about people who've got really key business skills? So very skill developed there. Is it about skill and performance? Or do you see everybody as being talent, but it's about getting the most out of people? So it's more of a holistic piece. So what do you think here? Okay, most people so far are going CCC, or got some, yeah, it just does depend on who you ask, because people will have perceptions of it. Follow-up question for you. What do you think of the term talent? Do you all use that term in your organisations, or do you have any different language that you might use for it? What's your think about it? Ada, you're more about skills, yours is development. Some of you are still thinking what it is in your organisation. So theoretically C, but is it there? So Gem saying talent, I'm assuming you're a Gemma. So talent is so far as talent's coming through, but do let us know if you've got any other terminology that people are using in your organisation as well. So on the whole, the world has moved on. And I say this because I remember 20 odd years ago, talent was seen as being a little bit elitist. And it was kind of that people were sort of picked out. It's almost like a darkened room type thing. And it wasn't necessarily that transparent, which could be a little bit negative, or only certain aspects of the business were seen that way. Whereas what we're thinking about now, it is about identifying key skills. It's about seeing where people can go in the organisation. So it's definitely something that has moved on. And from your responses here, that seems to be the case as well, which is great. I think one of the reasons for this is that there are challenges with the term talent, though. Sometimes organisations don't really know what talent looks like. And I say that because what I mean by that is that they may not really have defined it very clearly. Do we really know what good looks like in our organisation? Could we simply define and measure it? How easy is that? So although we kind of think about it, it's often quite intuitive and it's not always that clear, which means it could be bias. It could be one person may think that someone is talent and others might see it differently. And that's because talent can be situational. There's quite interesting evidence that, if you see people who are really high performers in one environment, it doesn't automatically translate that they are going to come and be a high performer in another environment. So it is really quite tricky. I mean, what we've kind of answered here when you were saying we're looking for people's talents to make the most of them, that's a really lovely way of thinking. I think of things like the Montessori's at schools that used to kind of say every child's got skills, it's just about finding them. And is that what we're trying to do now in organisations? Tap into people's skills and allow them to use them to their best within the organisation. And that does require us to have better visibility, better processes to enable people to have that way of being visible and the ability to move. And I think visibility, it could be, there could be bias in terms of some managers may see talent as someone who is the same as them. But there can also be other types of biases we well know. If you think about diversity, equity, etc. The hybrid working piece is interesting. This is something that's really only been actively something we need to consider over the last 5 or 6 years, because as people work in a hybrid setting, you can have really skilled people, but you may not be seeing them, or they may not have visibility from their manager. So we've got to think about visibility bias. So it is something where just have to be quite careful with the term talent and make sure we think about how we define it within our organisation in terms of the purpose to get the most out of it. So if you're thinking about building a talent management strategy, my proposal to you is we need to think about the why. So challenge again to you, I'm making you work for your lunch, don't worry if you got your lunch in a very, what do you see as a why in terms of a talent management strategy for your organisation? If you're thinking about how do you make it something that's really relevant and powerful, why would you do this? Because bear in mind that you need to know why, assuming that people here are mainly in HR roles. You're probably going to have to spend some money, whether it's on tech or whether it's on development, to do that. What's the strategic business why for talent management in your organisation, do you think? Totally, Gemma. So make sure that you've got a succession pipeline so you can keep those jobs going at the top, and therefore you need to keep people engaged and retain them in the business. You want to keep that top talent, the best people in your business, to give you a competitive edge. That's definitely a way forward for sure. Any other thoughts as to why you might have your whys that you may have? Mm. Yes, absolutely, Mark. So knowledge retention and skills transfer, having key skills in the business, making sure people know how to do things. I mean, that's an interesting one, can work in lots of ways. I'm thinking to organizations where you've got brand new skills and knowledge, you need to make sure that you keep those skills, those people with them in the business. You can also have it where, as I think, if you think now about how much business has changed over the last 40 years, there will be legacy skills that you have in people who are close to retirement that you still need for a degree, so to a certain extent within that organisation. So you need to be able to transfer those or not lose it altogether. So thinking about how do we maintain those skills and that knowledge in our organisation. Succession planning and motivation, absolutely. TC, I don't know what your name is, mate. TC 00071. I'm going to guess that you're, I don't know. I won't throw my names out there, but thank you for responding there. I'm curious as to what your name is. So new drivers that I came up with here, and the reason I think this is useful is if you're coming up with your talent management strategy and you want to go and get investment in it, it's making that connection in terms of why are we doing things. Now, what you might on the face of it say, you might say, okay, we want to have clear sight of where we've got visibility gaps in our hybrid workforce and retain them, and we want to make sure we get the best out of them. So that is a strategy, but actually what is the business strategy that's supporting? Well, if you do that, that's going to make sure that your business is performing optimally. You're going to have the best performers in your business. So it's being able to make that connection. So what I've got here is where we might say, actually, we want to do workforce planning and it's all about the right skills. So skills-based workforce planning. which means that our business is going to deliver and be a high performing. It could be that you want to make the case for some career co-creation where, you know, the old ladder no longer serves us. We want people to be able to work together, to think about where they want to go, to be empowered to be able to take themselves on that journey. So why would we do that? Because people want to be autonomous. They want to be invested in, and this is driving engagement and retention. So saving us money this way. So the engagement and retention, and as is the final one, if you wanted to look at, you know, talent management from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, really valid as well. You could have a selection of these. What's that going to do for the business? What's the so what there? Well, you could argue it's engagement as well, but it might be employer brand. Why is employer brand important? Because you want to attract the best people to your organization and then keep them. So when you're thinking about the why, it's definitely think about, you know, what it is that you're going to do, but then also why is the big business driver for that, and that helps to hook it into the business strategy and to make that definition for it. Kelly, that's a really good one. Actually, that's one that's not on here, but customer confidence. So that's going to help business performance, isn't it? If people know that you've got a skilled workforce, they deliver great quality service, they're highly engaged, then you're going to deliver well to your customers. So it absolutely fits in strategically there that you're going to offer great service, which means you're going to retain customers and deliver greater performance. Now, there's so much talent management terminology. I've got this little word cloud here, and there's some great succession planning, talent management jargon on here. I had a little look at some of the new ones here. I don't know if there's any that people that are new to some of you. I'm sure that you've all come across the idea of having talent pools, where you might have groups of people that are identified together as having potential for certain roles or future responsibilities. Now, it's all very well having a talent pool, but all of these are only useful if there's a so what factor. So what are you going to do with them? So I guess the principle there is, if you've got a talent pool, do they have common development needs? Can you work with them together where they can learn from each other and be developed together so that you're accelerating them on that journey? A less positive one would be where you might identify people who are a flight risk. So they are really high performers, potentially, or critical skills within your business, but you're conscious that maybe they're a bit disengaged, maybe they're very remote, their line manager hasn't got high engagement scores. Are they someone that you're at risk of losing from the business? And we know that recruitment is costly, it's painful to get people up to speed. So that sort of thing you want to identify and prevent people from wanting to leave. So you may have ways of measuring that and looking at that sort of data. Think about your diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. If you're able to within your systems, you could be looking at the extent to which different demographics are treated within your organization. You could look at, if you're an organization that puts certain people on development pathways, or you use performance ratings, you could map those against DEI metrics to see whether there's any inherent bias that you're aware of. You could also, it doesn't have to be diversity, equity, and inclusion. You could look at people who are working remotely, because I don't think I'd count that as inclusion, but you could look at different metrics and see how open and consistent the way people are managed within your organisation are. Things that weren't in place when I was in an OD role, having skill taxonomies where you might be organising key skills within your business to map employee capabilities, and that you might group them together like in job families to see where people have got skills. Now that can be really useful, because when you want to retain talent and it's not necessarily going to go up, and actually less and less are people going to necessarily go and be the next line manager of their group, which is a really traditional hierarchical approach. How can we help people to use those skills and go across the organisation, where you've got this sort of concept of flexible development module? They call it career lattices. There's also of terminology that where people you are able to develop and keep moving, keeping them interested, but they're moving laterally and around the organisation. That enriches your organisation, it develops the individual, and it's not putting pressure necessarily on that sort of vertical, traditional, dead man's shoes approach to movement. I also came across this term talent marketplace when I was doing the research for this, which was I wasn't quite sure what that meant. I think this is very really in very specific type organisations where, and it would probably have to be quite a big organisation. I think the organisation that they cited there was someone like Unilever, where people were able to browse for short-term projects to add skills. So where people are getting on-the-job learning and they could get involved in something which would give them a stretch assignment that's aligned to their skill. Now, again, obviously you want them to do the day job, but that's a really versatile way of using people, keeping them engaged. And if they're learning, which is often one of the key aspects of it, then they're likely to want to stay in the business. They're adding to their own value, but they're also contributing to the business. So quite a lot of new terms here, as well as the more traditional terms that we've got. And a couple of the jargons on here, the 9-box grid and the career pathways, I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail now. So I'm sure you've heard of a 9-box grid and career pathways, and you're maybe wondering how to use them. I mean, how many of you are using a 9-box? Have any of you actively using 9-box grids or career pathways in your organisations? Let me know if that's something that you're expert in. I think it's the 9-box grid is something which is a bit Marmite. Some people, yeah, love it. You are using it, Mark. Have you been using it for a long time? Is it working for the business? Yeah, I think it is. It is. I mean, there isn't something I would say that's better necessarily, but yeah, how do you do it? It has pros and cons, and I think that's the thing to do. And how can we do it? And it is a tool. I think one of the takeaway for both 9-box grids or career pathways, they're not ends in their own right, and sometimes we can offer 9-box grids within Actus, and sometimes I think people think that it is the panacea, but it is just a tool. And I say the reason I'm in this pool is it's a tool which could identify talent pools that you need to then develop. So it is something that you need to be able to manage it appropriately. It is a tool. You don't need to. It's not the only way of doing things. But I say, in principle, it is a useful tool for identifying and categorizing talent, particularly if you're an organization above a certain size. And I think that's one of the things that is tricky. The other thing about it, and actually I'll go on to my second slide here because it will show you more about the pros and cons that we can look at. Let me say, okay, yeah, so what Mark's saying, which I think is quite a good way of thinking about it. So the traditional, I think it was originally McKinsey that came up with it. It talked about potential and performance. And so to do your 9-box grid in your appraisal, you'd be looking at the performance that someone's delivering. And of course, in order to know how they're performing, you've got to have some sort of performance management process, probably with ratings that assesses their performance in that business year. And then this concept of potential is one which I think is challenging because it can be seen as really subjective. Who assesses that potential? If your line manager doesn't think that you've got potential, who are they to know that? So that can be one of the tricky aspects of it, potential with bias. Now, I know one of the businesses that I used to work for, they moved it to ability to learn because, which is kind of the same thing, but they re-messaged it. But again, it is something which is down to the individual. And it can feel quite subjective, which can mean that people are demotivated. They don't necessarily like that label. Sometimes also that whole concept of being boxed. I'm not sure that anyone loves that necessarily. But yeah, interesting, Mark, in terms of bias towards moving up through the roles. I personally think you could use it by just identifying where people are in their career or in their life at that point, right? In terms of within that business and thinking where their development needs. You could definitely use it to sort of simplify where people need development. So if somebody, they need to be motivated if their potential or ability to learn, how do we inspire them? We energize them to want to raise their game. Now that's probably a line management role. So you need to train your line managers to be able to stretch people to want to raise themselves. And actually, how do we encourage them to perform? Again, how is the line manager working with people to set stretch objectives, to give them greater, like regular one-to-ones or feedback as to how they can perform better. So you want the whole thing to be really mobile, I think, to fluid. I think it feels better if it is something that people see as fluid as opposed to rigid, and that's easier said than done. And you've also got to think about how open you're going to be about it. But for sure, when you're in an organization trying to make decisions about who to invest in or how to invest in their development, you could use this approach, and you could use any kind of metrics to come up with 9-box grid. So you could rethink what are the right metrics for our organization in order to divide things up, with the goal, the whole purpose of it is identifying how to help people to be even better, getting people into little groups where you can develop them as potential pools, in my opinion, that simplifies the way you work for people. Now, when people get to a certain level, you might really have to customize development. It becomes very individualized. And of course, some technologies can allow you to do that now without having to manage people in groups. So it does depend where you are. But certainly, I think it has value, but it has to be managed quite carefully, and it needs to be calibrated consistently. If you are using a 9-box grid approach, I really would suggest that you need to have some calibration to allow for manager bias, so making sure that you've not got certain managers who are massively over or underrating. Also, making managers aware of their own natural unconscious bias. We've talked about some of that earlier in terms of visibility of people. But most importantly, it should be about a development conversation rather than a judgment. And if you are actually going to invest in a 9-box grid, make sure there are consequences, as in positive ones. Because if you're going to do that and then do nothing with it, it's probably not worth the pain. So make sure that you are able to link it to things which are positive and do something with it. So my suggestion to make them work well is to make sure that you're treating the boxes as talent pools with aligned development needs. Ensure that people you're getting multiple perspectives in terms of including self-evaluation, because I think the individual is one who's most likely, someone highly motivated to do their best, regardless of what the manager thinks, is relevant if someone's highly ambitious. Make it fluid rather than rigid. And that is something that's really key in terms of people not feeling they're stuck in a box forever. And if you're going to do something like this, make sure that there is some investment in growth opportunities for people to be able to do something with it. So then if we look at more about career pathways, so this is more about individualized progress through an organization. And I think this is very suitable for smaller businesses. I think 9-box grid is a bit overkill for a smaller business, but you can again use this is horses for courses. You can fit it in the way you want to for your organization. So you may consider career pathways for key skills. So let's say project management is a really key skill in your organization. You really need to retain people. So you might group those as a talent pool and develop a career pathway for that talent pool where you're defining development for them, and it may sit outside of your traditional hierarchy. So you could create a hierarchy for project managers where they get specific development and specific reward for progressing up that hierarchy. And the reward doesn't need to be monetary. It could be status, senior project manager, or other sort of things that you can put in there. So you can consider things which are collectives, or the whole squiggly careers type approach where the individual can take on their career pathway, and they might look at different options as to how they move around. And that could be cultural. So are you setting it up that people can drive their own careers, go and talk to people about where they might want to go and contribute somewhere else in an organization? So some of that is a way in which you could just, if you're in a small organization, how can you message that to help people be autonomous, be empowered, and take responsibility for their own career? At the end of the day, it is their career. It's not down to all of us in HR always to do it. So things to think about there in terms of a career framework is your practicalities. Again, depending on the size of your department and the budget available, think about, are you going to just focus on a couple of pathways, i.e. a couple of key skills? Is it more ad hoc where it's about individually driven, whatever it is? Is the pathway for promotion or development? Those are sort of questions to ask. And whichever you choose, how do people get considered for it? Is it sort of done quietly, or is it self-selection or nomination? And regardless, there's no right or wrong, because both have the potential for bias. But thinking about what the process is for something if you're going to put a career pathway in place, how people come onto it. And I guess thinking it through properly, the reason I'm putting something like this is get you to think it totally through, because it can be that if you're a small team, you end up starting something and you realize that you've bitten off more than you can chew, and it's a massive project. So thinking about how you manage to control that and to make sure that you can actually have the resource to follow it through and do it well. So it may be better to start with a pilot pathway, and start small and then add more as you go through, because you'll learn a lot as you're putting it in place. The technicalities to think of is in terms of defining that is, are you thinking about core skills that everybody's got, or is it specific technical skills? That depends whether it's a specialist career pathway or, actually leadership development. Maybe you want to look at core leadership skills that could link to everybody. You might look at where there's others that might come into that area where there's crossing over skills that you could develop or do more with. This concept of dynamic role profiles. I mean, job descriptions really are outdated now, aren't they? But role profiles, new term for job description. You can argue about what the difference of it, but how are we sort of making them dynamic as people pick up new skills and are developing new skills? Because everything's, AI suddenly has become common screen, suddenly being able to do things that all of us need to learn how to use and do. This ability to learn is actually really key in terms of what we might use. So if you've got the opportunity to invest in some sort of platform, you could think about what it is you're trying to achieve. And again, that would all come back down to your purpose. So there's loads of different AI things. I've got a slide on this where you can look at it, but they all do slightly different things. So this is where it comes back to, you need to know why or what you're trying to achieve strategically before you would make a case for investing in one of these type platforms, to be able to justify the investment and make sure you're going to get the most out of it. So pulling that together into your talent management strategy, keeping it simple, back down to it, think, what do you think your purpose and drivers are? So go back to the slide that we had, which is what overall are we trying to drive? Remember, there's lots, often, if you focus on retention, you will also do engagement. There will be other benefits. Doesn't stand alone, but have that key purpose and driver, which you can link to business strategy. Then think about, what tools am I going to need to evaluate where we are currently and our future position? And is it going to be something like a 9-box grid? Is it going to be performance management? Is it going to be a series of competency assessments? What are we going to do to assess where we are currently and then set our goal for future? When you then make that plan, make sure you align your terminology and messaging so that people understand what you're talking about and involve others. Get buy-in from the top, because to do this properly, you need to have investment, whether it's monetary investment, but you will need to have investment from people in terms of time and the engagement with the process. Then when you put it in place, implement it and align the development opportunities. So it's not just about the assessment. You need to have a clear link to development opportunities, and it's never fully done, right? So start in a manageable, don't bite off more than you can chew, because you can do it on a regular basis. So commit to putting something in place for year one, put it in place, learn from it and iterate. Sorry, I put the word iteration, that should be iteration. So that's the sort of natural process that you can do, and it's something that evolves over time. It's not a one and done. Then the other things to think about, which I think are newer things to be aware of, is think about the inclusivity. Inclusivity is so important in terms of belonging and retention and engagement. So whereas this would have been very much something that was totally defined by the L&D or HR, can we use the employee voice to really understand what people want? Now, by employee voice, I'm thinking retention interviews, pulse surveys, peer feedback. What are people saying about how they feel about how their opportunities to learn and grow within the organisation? So tap into that. I talked earlier about, make sure you haven't got bias going on, or if you think you have, then predefine it so you can change it and look at that in terms of your diversity. And then ensure that you've got development access that's really relevant to people. So inclusivity is definitely something to have front and centre, which perhaps might not have been so much so. And that in itself, it's not the only thing, but it's something that whatever you come up with, check it for the inclusivity. And then, I don't think we can not talk about the offers of technology. That thing, the world is changing so dramatically in terms of what we do. Now, most of these are fairly big bucks. So if you're in a very, if you've got a big budget, great. But it is interesting. And with all of these things, it will become more and more accessible. So, there is AI skill matching now. So in principle, AI could identify where an individual has got leadership competencies or the potential for leadership competencies and match it. Now, none of these things are perfect, and any bias we know that's built into a platform can then lead to more bias. But it is interesting how quickly things are going on and how powerful it could be. So that could really help you in terms of identifying future successors. It could also discriminate against people. So I think all of these come with a hefty dose of careful. Behavioral pattern recognition. So some of the technology says that they can analyze historical data that predicts leadership traits. So if you could work out people, particularly, I guess, if you've been using the same platform for a long period of time, or it's a certain personality metric or tool that you've used, and then you can see where people have been successful in future, then they can see those patterns and recognize it again, which means you can spot that talent early, again, in principle. It is interesting, all of these, because all of this is kind of assuming that what went on in the past, that I do think we have to be careful with it, because someone who might have become a great leader, but they wouldn't have had the opportunity if they were, let's say, a person of color. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's leadership traits in all of these things. I think we have to be really mindful of, but it is interesting. It could save us a lot of time to be able to do this. I like the ones where where we're looking at engagement and aspirations, where the individual can drive this and say, this is what I'm interested in. These are my values. These are the skills I want to develop, because that is empowering and that is driven by them. It's not others judging you, or it's not based on historical data. So you can use tools there that will help with that. Same with things to do with development, where people are choosing to learn certain things. It might track their learning development, their levels of their interest, which could show that those people who are really up for growth, which half of it's attitude. And of course, peer and manager feedback. So we've got things like 360 tools, which are useful to balance out and triangulate data. So I think it's important that we bear in mind what is useful. Now, again, are any of you using anything with AI or tech? Any of you tried any of these things? We'd love to know from you, or considered any of them. Do tell us in the chat, because this is up and coming and it's new, so it's quite useful to learn from others. Please do say in the chat if any of you got any experience of any of these, but certainly the potential is there, and it's worth keeping an eye on as to how we can simplify things. We can be more and more effective, and get more, and think more broadly about talent. So in summary, my key takeaways from this is that actually talent is broader and much more nuanced than ever. It's really important to think about organizational context, and also individual context. So personalization, I think, is the way forward in terms of engagement and also getting the best out of people. So context matters more than models. 9box and career pathways, really useful tools, but they're not the whole answer. And making sure, by thinking about skills inclusion and including the employee voice and personalizing things, you're going to really future-proof your talent management approach. So I'll pause there, and we'll also send out this little white paper. It's just a bit of a jargon buster in terms of succession planning. We'll send that on to you, and that might be useful in terms of that. And you can, as I say, the links to the HR Uprising podcast, I'll talk further on this on the podcast coming up. So just flagging those for you. If you do have any questions or comments, please pop them in the chat. And let me just let you know, we're having a break for August, as is usual for us in terms of that. And our next webinars, September, is going to be all about mastering organisational change. And we've also got a brand new module. It's called Actus Oversight. It's geared generally at financial services because they have a specific pain point that's relevant at the moment. But in principle, it could be used for tracking balanced scorecard metrics, other metrics. It's basically an oversight metric. So if you wanted to see anything on that, you can join us there, or just have a look on the platform. Or if you're one of our customers, do come and have a word with one of the team. Actually, Jane or Maria would be able to share it for you. Thank you so much for joining.